Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from New York. Good morning for those who are joining us from Jakarta, Indonesia. Welcome to this webinar, recognized as a side event of the UNFF 17, the 17th session of the United Nations Forum on Forests, which is taking place physically in the office of Permanent Representative of the Republic of Indonesia to the United Nations in New York. This particular event is hosted by the Indonesian Mission in collaboration with the Indonesian Ministry of Environment and Forestry. We hereby recognize the presence of Deputy Chief of Mission, Deputy Representative, Ambassador Koba, and the Director General, Dr. Agus Justianto. In conjunction with the UNFF 17, we shall be delighted to focus on FOLU contribution to the greenhouse gases emission reduction. We will walk through the topic with competent speakers joining us later on. But to begin with, it is an honor to invite Ambassador Muhammad Koba, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Indonesia to the UN in New York. Mr. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Honorable panelists, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. Good afternoon from New York and welcome everyone from various time zones to today's virtual side events. Forest is life. The sentence is perhaps the simplest yet most powerful sentence that can describe the vital role of forests for all of us. From the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the support it provides to livelihoods of around 1/5 of world's population, to its critical role in addressing climate change. We owe all of those to forests. And with so many facets of humanity interlinked to forests, it is therefore only right to see forests in a comprehensive and balanced manner. This is particularly true for Indonesia, as forests making up more than 60% of our land areas, and it is the sole provider for livelihood for various parts of our country. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, when we talk about forest conservation, it is also crucial to address the well-being of the people and vice versa. Against this backdrop, my delegation requests to turn your attention to today's discussion on one specific role of forests that, in our opinion, requires a closer look. That is on the role of forests as a major contributor to reach emission reduction target. Through our discussion today, we will touch upon several important issues, ranging from the role of forests in carbon storing and its carbon trading potential, the required multi-stakeholder partnership, and collaboration to support sustainable forest management. I sincerely hope that today's discussion would enrich and expand our understanding on the topic, that it would in turn will open avenues for future concrete cooperation. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ambassador Koba. As we are all aware, FOLU, F-O-L-U, refers to forestry and other land uses, which is under the Paris Agreement known as a sector prime areas for major reduction of CO2 emission, along with other sectors, including agriculture, energy, transportation, waste, and industry. So the bigger context of our discussion today is obviously Paris Agreement, in particular, the attainment of respective targets under the NDC. Let's get the first update from Indonesia. But before calling upon the Director General, Agus Yustianto, please, ladies and gentlemen, be advised that this webinar will be relayed through YouTube on Tuesday, 10th of May, 2022, from 9 a.m. to 11:45 a.m. Indonesia's Western Time. 9 a.m. to 11:45 a.m. Tuesday. As for those who are following us virtually now, you may wish to interact later through chat box available in this webinar feature system. But first, kindly identify yourself and your institution. As such, you may be allowed access to the system. Now, it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Agus Yustianto, who is the Director General for Sustainable Forest Management under the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Dr. Yustianto.
Thank you, Moderator. Very good afternoon and good morning to all of you. Excellency Ambassador Muhammad Koba, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Indonesia to the United Nations in New York, Honorable Speakers, Mr. Peter Gondo, Inter-Regional Advisor, the United Nations Forum on Forest Secretariat, Mr. Valdis Mezanis, Director of U.S. Forest Service International Programs, Dr. Garo Barmanian, Lead Environmental Specialist for Environment, Natural Resources, and Blue Economy Global Practice, the World Bank, Mr. Fong Sok, Assistant Director, Head of Environment Division, Sustainable Development Directorate, ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Department, my colleague, Dr. Wanda Agung Sugardiman, Acting Director General of Forestry Planning and Environmental Governance, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia, and Professor Indroyono Susilo, Chairman of the Indonesian Forestry Business Association. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, please allow me to extend to all of you very welcome to this UNFF 17 side event on forestry and other land use contribution to greenhouse gases emission reduction. I would also like to express my sincere thanks to Excellency Ambassador, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Indonesia to the United Nations in New York, and his team in facilitating this important session for discussing FOLU sector contribution to greenhouse gases emission reduction. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In the updated NDC document, Indonesia has set a target of reducing greenhouse gases emission by 29% through its own efforts in 2030 and up to 41% depending on level of international cooperation. The commitment is expressed in the updated NDC document as well as the long-term strategies for low carbon and climate resilience 2050. Decision 1/CP.21 Article 4, Paragraph 19 mandates nations that ratify the Paris Agreement to adopt a long-term strategy for low carbon emission in order to achieve the Paris Agreement goals of halting global temperature rise. At the UNFF COP29 in Glasgow, Indonesia to keep pushing for greater greenhouse gases emission reduction targets with the support of international technical collaboration, particularly in the areas of technology and financial investment. This requires the cooperation of the parties in a systemic, exploratory, and synergetic way to maintain a cleaner Earth's atmosphere from greenhouse gas effects. In the LTS-CCR vision, Indonesia expresses its commitment to achieving ambitious targets through the Indonesia's FOLU Net Sink 2030 initiative and attempts to promote a renewable energy or decarbonization transition, as well as targets in 3 other sectors, namely agriculture, waste, and industry. Indonesia has declared the achievement of lowering greenhouse gas emission in the forestry sector and other land uses, where the carbon absorption rate is higher than the emission level in 2030 under the Indonesia FOLU Net Sink 2030. In addition, Indonesia aims to attain a carbon net sink by 2060 or sooner in collaboration with other sectors. In the development of the FOLU sector and the energy sector, Indonesia possesses a great natural resources capital. The expansion of energy plantation and the prospective development of forest regions as environmental services, such as geothermal energy, water flow, wind and sunlight, and even the utilization of waste for energy purposes can help the 2 sectors synergize. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia FOLU Net Sink 2030 aims to reduce carbon emissions, increase carbon absorption, and sustain carbon sequestration through a variety of planned activities, including reducing emission from deforestation and degradation, as well as forest and land fires control, development of plantation forests, sustainable forest management, forest rehabilitation, including mangrove, peatland management, conservation forest management. These varieties of planned activities will need a large number of financial investment with a total investment of $14.57 billion. Based on our projection, this investment will be utilized for $7.59 billion for reducing deforestation and forest degradation, $5.47 billion for plantation forest development, $4.82 billion for increasing the carbon stock, including the implementation of mitigation action and on sustainable forest management, and $4.69 billion for peatland management and restoration. We believe that is very crucial and necessary to involve the community in and surrounding forest areas through partnerships, such as conservation partnerships, social forestry, customary forest, and partnership in concession or business permit, as well as continuing to promote the global partnership in order to make this effort a success. Furthermore, in order to implement Indonesia FOLU Net Sink by 2030, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry has launched an operational plan as the guidance to the stakeholders for their specific targets and action that should be conducted until the year 2030. For this operational plan of Indonesia FOLU Net Sink 2030, my colleague Dr. Ruanda Agung Sugadriman will later on deliver more information in his presentation. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude my remark, I believe that the forestry and other land use sector will provide a significant contribution to the world greenhouse gases emission reduction with the support of all stakeholders at the local, national, and global levels. Therefore, at this UNFF 17 set event, I do hope that all speakers could share their experiences, knowledge, and innovative ideas for strengthening our commitments to reducing greenhouse gases emission for our future generation. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director General. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the DG just now has set the tone and provided us with an update regarding FOLU sector, in particular about net sink 2030 from Indonesia's perspective. Today, I think we are fortunate. We got no less than 6 prominent speakers ready to contribute to the topic, representing UNFF, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry again of Indonesia, from US Forest Service, and then from the World Bank, ASEAN, and last but not least, from representing private sector, business association. I will call upon them respectively in due time. But again, please be advised that you may wish to use the webinar feature to interact with us by identifying your name and institution so that you could write questions or comments and submit it to us. We will get back to you with response. And if we have sufficient time towards the end of this webinar, we will read out the questions from here before adjourning the event, and you will receive in writing the feedback from us. May I now request Mr. Peter Gondo of the UNFF Secretariat to deliver his intervention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Your Excellency, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for affording us this opportunity to speak on this occasion. We are aware that climate change is one of the biggest threats to humanity and to our whole planet. And we have this huge task for us to prevent the global warming from rising above 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. And according to the recent IPCC report, we really need to work very hard to be able to achieve this target. In fact, they estimate that we will need to remove as much as 10 to 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere each year if we are to avoid reaching this or going beyond the 2 degrees Celsius. So we really have a big challenge. Fortunately, forests have a big role to play. In fact, estimates say that we up to between 25 and 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions can be removed by forests. So it is really important that we focus on how sustainable forest management can help us achieve this greenhouse gas reduction. Now, one of the most important findings and recent publications from the IPCC is the importance of primary forests. Our primary forests have the highest concentration of carbon stocks and biodiversity, and they are really well placed to help us address the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. But not only that, they also contribute, as has already been highlighted by the previous speaker, they contribute significantly to livelihood support, water provision, and other ecosystem services. In fact, 95% of our growing stock, carbon stock, is actually held in natural forests, and only about 5% is in planted forests. Now, this has a major implications on how we move forward. First, I want to note that with countries like Indonesia, who have a high forest cover and low deforestation rates, it is really important to provide the incentives and support for these countries to maintain, protect and conserve their natural forests, whilst adding to this through afforestation, reforestation, and restoration of degraded forest areas. So in terms of the critical strategies that we are looking at for enhancing carbon stocks, essentially we are looking at three main pathways. The conservation and management of protected areas or forest protection. Then the second is to focus on sustainable management and utilization of the forests. We recognize that these forests have to contribute to economic development and to livelihood support. So the focus on sustainable management and utilization is very critical, and here we need to make use of all available science, new innovations and technology to ensure that we have efficient and sustainable use of these forests. The third pathway is restoration. We need to really, if we are going to increase the forest cover and increase the carbon stocks and our capacity to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, then we have to restore the degraded forests and degraded forest landscapes. Now, restoration in itself is very expensive, and it requires governments, philanthropic organizations, and the whole international community to collaborate in mobilizing the resources that are required for us to restore the degraded areas that are there if we are to achieve the target that was set in the United Nations Strategic Plan for Forests, which is to increase forest cover by 3% worldwide by 2030. We need to really look at how to mobilize the resources to invest in this. Just looking a little bit more into this, given that some of the majority of the threats to sustainable forest management come from outside the forest sector, when we tackle landscape or forest landscape restoration, we need to adopt integrated approaches, which also include interaction with other sectors in integrated land use planning, especially to anticipate what is the likely development in future and ensure that we invest in those areas that are not likely to be converted to other land uses in future. We also need to recognize and strengthen our mechanisms for support for payment for ecosystem services. Although we have talked about this for a long time, we are not advancing as fast as we should, and we really need to focus on this. We also need to improve and strengthen value chains for both wood and non-wood forest products so that the forest resources can provide the economic and livelihood support they provide. We need to look at what incentives we need to provide to, especially agriculture, so that we promote deforestation-free agriculture and remove any perverse incentives. We also need, of course, to recognize that we have people who live in and around the forests, and it's therefore important to empower the indigenous populations and local communities who are involved in the management and restoration of some of these forests. And lastly, policy coherence is critical. We need to work with other sectors, water, energy, agriculture, so that we really avoid having conflicting policies, but we harmonize our policies so that they contribute to the protection and sustainable management of all forests. Now, just coming quickly, I was asked to talk a little bit about the carbon finance. I think we have seen that at the moment we have funds that are coming through from various readiness programs. We also have seen some funding coming through voluntary markets. The challenge was that in the last few years, especially in the last decade, the prices of carbon have fallen below $10. In fact, under the GCF result-based payments pilot, the price they offered was $5 per ton. Now, these prices are very low. They are not they don't provide adequate incentive for investment in red projects. We really need to look at how to improve these prices. Some estimates say that we need to go above $12. Others have even said we should move as close as possible to $80 per ton. So the issue of how to improve our payment mechanism for results-based payments is very important. The recently agreed Paris Agreement Article 6 has really offered a new dimension with regards to carbon finance. It clarifies how international carbon markets involving governments should function, how the transfer of emission reduction between countries should be done, and also provides mechanisms for incentivizing the private sector to invest in climate-friendly solutions. And this is really important. I think this opens new opportunities for us to invest in a reduction of emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, and also from emission removals from standing primary forests. I just want to give an example of how already this Article 6 is beginning to help. The LEAF Coalition, which is a partnership between the private sector and governments, is already providing finance for tropical and subtropical conservation, and it provides payment for verified emission reductions and supports jurisdictional REDD+ emission reductions and removals. In November last year, they actually mobilized $1 billion in their first call. They have already signed up with some countries who have submitted proposals for this jurisdictional emission reductions and removals. And there are now 23 others that are under consideration. We have submitted eligible proposals. They've also opened up a second call just recently, which goes up to September. So this really provides an opportunity for increased mobilization of carbon finance from the private sector. And we are already seeing even aviation companies, the airlines, increasing their efforts to offset their carbon footprint. So this is really a good development. So just to conclude then, I think we really need to focus on primary forests and natural forests, as they are the biggest reservoir of our carbon, and we should manage them and invest in their protection. Of course, forest landscape restoration offers us the opportunity to increase our carbon stocks, but as we do this, we need integrated approaches and land use planning to ensure we are working together with all other sectors and to avoid conflict in future. And I think it's still, just to conclude on this, it's important to go beyond carbon. As the Director General said, whilst we are focusing on carbon in this discussion on REDD, we should look at the other ecosystem services that the forests provide, and that will help increase the value of the forest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gondo. I think you have heated up our discussion with so many elements. We clearly notice the importance of continuing struggle with incentive, and you give emphasis on the key elements of sustainable forest management on science-based, which will help the restoration as well as afforestation and reforestation, in particular involving degraded area. Even an increase of 3% is quite a big challenge for us. Another important message from you, as I noted here, is to go beyond forest land, to see the landscape and check all the other function of the forest, which include payment of ecosystem services, anything else beyond REDD. And you underline the importance to sustain primary forests. which is valuable, very valuable for the carbon stock. Towards the end, you touch upon the situation regarding carbon finance, for which we need to improve a lot of the carbon pricing nowadays. And there is light at the end of the tunnel when they managed to discuss finally Article 6 with some prescription. It's hopeful. So Mr. Peter Gondo, who is the inter-regional advisor under the UNFF, has been contributed very favorably to this discussion. If agreeable to you, I would like to go back to my home country, Indonesia, by calling upon my colleague, specialist, Dr. Wanda Agung Sugardiman, was former the Director General of Planning under the Ministry. But if you don't mind, Pak Rwanda, would you kindly follow up on the subject that we have treated this morning by the Director General Agus Yustianto on FOLU netting? Perhaps you can enlighten us more on the subject of the operational plan of this FOLU netting 2030 from the Indonesia's perspective. Please, Pak Rwanda.
Thank you, Pak Efransa, Moderator, His Excellency, the Ambassador, and the distinguished panelists. Good afternoon in New York and the early morning in Indonesia. Thank you very much. You are joining in our side event on UNFF in New York. Yes, I'm following the discussion about the FOLU, forestry and land use sector. We are going to discuss more detail about how Indonesia prepare the FOLU netting on 2030. So this is based on our regulation. So the Ministry of Environment and Forestry decree that already signed on 24 February this year, that we have already the operational plan for forestry and land use sector to be netting on to 2030. So we have this regulation to finish this activity. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the book. It's a quite thick book about the operational. So we are going to more discussion about this issue. Ladies and gentlemen, starting from the Paris Agreement that Mr. President Joko Widodo stated that Indonesia will contribute to reduce the greenhouse gas emission in 2030 by 29% by Indonesian budgeting, and can be 41% if we international support. So in Paris agreement, in Paris, November 2015, President Jokowi gave the statement, and then in November 2016, the minister signed the Paris Agreement, and back to Indonesia, the Parliament ratified the Paris Agreement. It's become Indonesian law. So on that regulation, we have a NDC, the first NDC of Indonesia on 2016. So from the NDC, the first NDC, we make the NDC roadmap on 2019. And then because the several agenda in the national and also about the pandemic, we updated the NDC on July 2021 and submitted already to UNFCCC. And beside that updated NDC, we also submitted the LTS RCCR 2050, Indonesia Long-Term Strategy, Low Carbon and Climate Resilient 2050. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Indonesia NDC consists 5 sectors: energy, waste, industry, agriculture, and forestry. You can see from the table, from the number in 2030, by Indonesia capability, we targeted to be reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 29%, and in the international support, we can reduce by 41% in the forestry sector. So from here, we can see that forestry is the biggest contribution on greenhouse gas emission target in Indonesia. It's about 60% of our emission. Ladies and gentlemen, now we can talk about the long-term strategy that we already submit to the UNFCCC. There are three scenarios. The first one is about the current scenario, and then transition scenario, and then the third is the scenario that compatible with the Paris Agreement. So from that table, you can see the right one. In 2030, all of this sector of the 5 sector of Indonesia peaking the emission on 2030. But in the same time, the forestry sector will have some sequestration and increasing the sink, so we come net sink on 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, back to this graphic. From the graphic, you can see in the upper side. Yeah. Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. Next. Nah, sebelumnya. Oh.
Sebelum. Did it freeze?
Yes, sir. Tinggal situ ya, Pak.
Yeah, yeah. Excuse me, there is some technical problem.
Yeah, I think you just pause at the quantitative aspect of reduction targets.
Yes,
which mentions certain
yes,
tons of carbon, no?
Yeah, yeah.
After the scenario.
After this one, yeah. Next. Yeah. Maju, Mas. Kebanyakan. Ya, ini nih. Yes, this is the graphic that we can see the detail one. The upper from the zero. So from the graphic, you can see that on 2030, the forestry sector has become the big sinker of the emission from the Indonesian 5 sector. So we can achieve on the 2030 has become net sink the emission of Indonesia. So what is the objective of our FOLU net sink? Is the first one, strengthening the policy and work implementation to achieve the Indonesian FOLU net sink with the systematic and measurable step. And the second one, establishing an operational action plan. So we have a operational that we can take place on the activity in the field. The third one is elaborating the NDC target into the detailed action plan, not only the graphic and a figure, but we are making elaboration that can be achieved in the field. And the fourth one is affirming the main supporting activity for the implementation of programs and activities. So the last one is how we can prepare the manual of operation of each policy in the main supporting strategy. So from that activity, our target is that the country aims to achieve a greenhouse gas emission level of minus 140 million tons CO2 equivalent by 2030. Next. Ladies and gentlemen,
Okay, can we move to the next slide, please?
yeah, ini udah.
My computer has moved, but it's not there.
Yeah. So from the planning of the FOLU, we have a 5 scope of the FOLU Net-Sink 2030. For example, the reduction of the deforestation rate of the mineral lands and also the peatland and mangrove. And until the 15, how we can supervise the law and enforcement in supporting the protection and security of the forest area. So that all of the 15 scope we have to do in the field. So the targeting the FOLU we can achieve on 2030. Next. Yeah. From this activity, we have the organization, how to, next saja. This is the corrective measure for the Ministry of Forestry sector that we can achieve 7 years ago. And this is also how we can achieve the FOLU Net-Sink by several activity that we can already make a manual that we can also do in the field by enforce the activity in the field. Next. Yes. This is the organization, how the FOLU Net-Sink can be done. We have the team in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry to deal with this activity of the FOLU Net-Sink 2030. So institutionally, the FOLU Net-Sink is already embedded within the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Next. Yeah, the key sector mitigation action of FOLU Net-Sink 2030, there are 5 main activity. The first one is emission reduction from deforestation and forest degradation. And the second is establishment of plantation forests. The third is sustainable forest management. And the fourth is forest rehabilitation. And the most important thing is how we can manage the peatland area. This is the most important things because the biggest emissions come from the peatland if this area, if this region is fired. So from that one, we have several detailed activity in the blue color. We can see what is the activity and every sector in the mitigation action in the FOLU. Next. Yeah, how we can select the area of activity is from the spatial analysis from the big 3 map. The first one is the map of location of priority index from the biogeophysical indexes. And the second map is the direction of optimizing forest utilization based on the environmental services index. And the third one is the Forest Management Unit Typology Map. From that map, we can make a spatial analysis, and we can select the area, the spatial, the province or site that the activity will be done in the field. Next. The following three big map is shown in this presentation. The first one is the IPL map, IGL map, and then the third is the TPH map. This is the IPL map. It's come from the emission, sink, and forest fire. Next. And the second is about the prioritizing the area, the optimizing the area. Bisa manual aja nggak ya? Manual aja mas di paparannya.
Oke.
Ya.
Ya, Pak. I think waktunya habis.
Yeah. This is the second map. Next, mas. Sampai ke finance aja, dibuka aja paparannya ke finance aja, langsung ke finance, exit ke finance, keluar dari paparan. Yeah. So how we can financing the activity of FOLU netting is based on the funding coming from the carbon market and non-carbon market, and the RBP, result-based payment of REDD. This strategy is already done in the President regulation. We have already the President regulation, how we can collect the financing for the FOLU netting. And then the next one is about the action plan. So we have already action plan, how we can achieve the FOLU netting. Each year there is an activity that we can do in the field. So that's all of the presentation.
Thank you very much. I wonder if you have relevant documentation.
Yes, we will share.
I think for those who are interested,
yeah,
to kindly contact us so that we can provide, because
sure, yeah,
as you see in the presentation, this is in the short time,
yeah,
and it's quite an extensive quantitative figures to be presented. So we would like to provide you later with the publication related to this. Thank you very much, Dr. Ruan Agung. And I think we have to move on to other speakers. And the next, before my list, is Dr. Valdis Mezanis of the U.S. Forest Service International Program. Are you there, Dr. Val?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank our colleagues at the Indonesia Ministry of Environment and Forestry for the invitation today to participate in the side event here at UNFF 17. And specific thanks to Pak Rwanda, who is my co-chair on Task Force 2 of the U.S. government and government of Indonesia bilateral cooperation on climate change. Pak Rwanda and I have co-chaired 2 sessions of this task force. Hopefully we'll do a third one coming up. We look forward to that. I would also like to give specific thanks to Pak Agus Justianto for continued coordination on U.S. Forest Service with us on Task Force 2. We look forward to that collaboration. I would also like to pass along our great thanks to the Minister of Environment and Forestry of Indonesia, Minister Nurbaya, for graciously hosting the U.S. Forest Service in Jakarta in March. I met the minister 4 years ago at the Committee on Forestry at FAO in Rome with our chief. We had over an hour meeting with the Indonesian delegation. Our chief at that time was Vicky Christensen. So 2 women, they were exchanging all kinds of information about how their careers have ascended through largely male organizations and how they came to be heads of natural resource agencies in our 2 countries. The minister invited our chief to come to Indonesia. We hope to shortly be able to do that with our current chief, Randy Moore. So we look forward to that. The U.S. Forest Service is very excited to be at this event today on the land use sector on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we have in the United States, the Forest Service over 100 years of experience managing forests. And we're currently a proud contributor to President Biden's climate change strategy in the United States. As you probably all know, we are a multiple use agency. We believe forests should be used for the betterment of people around them and people living in them. That's not to say that we don't have protected land. The U.S. Forest Service manages wilderness areas that are protected on the highest level category in terms of IUCN category. But this is an area where multiple use, where the philosophies of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry of Indonesia and the Forest Service of the United States sync up. We both believe in that. And so we have a good platform for which to cooperate in the future. The fight on climate change is a very broad one, and it's critical that technical agencies, sister technical agencies cooperate, such as the Forest Service and the Ministry of Environment and Forestry of Indonesia. We need to cooperate for what we can learn from each other, how we can support each other, and how we can help each other. Given the role of Indonesia's tropical forests, the role that they play in carbon storage and climate change mitigation, and the biodiversity that's contained within your forest, Indonesia will always be a priority country for the United States of America. We've worked with you for nearly 40 years. We hope to be working for hundreds of years because it's in both our countries' strategic interest, given our forest estates, to basically work together and to share knowledge as equal partners. The Forest Service currently works in about 90 countries around the world, over 90 countries around the world. And we're working for what we can contribute to countries around the world, but also what we can gain from technical cooperation. We're working on items such as forest deforestation, watershed management, protected area management, illegal logging, and fire. We're working on fire issues in over 20 countries in cooperation. All of these topics contribute to the resiliency of the forest If you have healthy watersheds, healthy protected areas, keep fire out of the ecosystem, and reduce illegal logging, that will be a positive in combating climate change. Also, we value the cooperation we currently have with Indonesia on community forestry. We look at the cooperation that we have around the world, obviously through the lens of the US government. We're a US government agency. But we also work at the community level with communities, stakeholders, NGOs, working with governments on science and policy, and working with NGOs and community groups on capacity building, training, and implementing at the grassroots level. So that is another area, along with multiple use, that we have synergies on social forestry in Indonesia and community forestry that we work on around the world. As a matter of fact, one of the things that the Forest Service has learned from Indonesia over the years is the approach to community forestry. In the United States, up to 40 years ago, it was all federal, not working so much with communities. We learned a lot from you on how to address that with NGOs and community groups. The U.S. Forest Service supports the ambition of the Indonesian Ministry of Environment and Forestry's Net Sink 2030 strategy that was just outlined. It's exciting. I know that your minister is very proud of this, and we'd like to cooperate with you on addressing this in future years. One form that we could continue to cooperate on with respect to the Net Sink strategy of 2030 is through Task Force 2. We could have a broader U.S. government and government of Indonesia meeting on that under the climate change cooperation, and we could actively engage our respective organizations in working together and refining cooperation under the 2030 strategy. So we look forward to that. We also would like to renew a letter of intent between the U.S. Forest Service and the Ministry of Environment and Forestry to reestablish a formal long-term cooperation between the two agencies. We look forward to a signing ceremony somewhere in Indonesia or the United States in the future on a letter of intent. This would formalize a direct relationship between our two agencies. Finally, the U.S. government and specifically the Forest Service is committed to working with Indonesia on an equal basis as partners for the long-term benefit of the environment, for natural resources, and as the ambassador said, for the people that live in and around the forests. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me today.
Dr. Val, thank you very much. 100 years of experiences. I think it's a quite a long time. It's become an history, and in relation with Indonesia, we have noted bilateral cooperation of at least 40 years. So this is a remarkable experience. Thank you very much for your words of encouragement and for your commitment to continue working together in this pursuit.
Thank you.
I just check, I'd like to greet our colleague in Indonesia. And I noticed there are so many things be put in the chat box, reflecting the curiosity and also the willingness to participate. In appreciation to your participation, I'm afraid I can only pick one at this moment because we still have 3 other speakers. And For this one, I would like to reserve Mr. Peter Gondo to respond. This is from our colleague Deden Nur Rahman, that the question will be read out later. But in the meantime, can I ask contribution from the Office of World Bank in Jakarta? And we would like to feature the intervention from Mr. Andre Aquino regarding I believe this is about the environment, yeah? Environment and natural resources. Can you please? Yes.
Selamat siang, Bapak, Ibu. Salam hormat dari Jakarta. His Excellency Armanata Kristiawan Nasir, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary for Permanent Mission of the Republic of Indonesia to the United Nations. Bapak Dr. Agus Justianto, Director General for Sustainable Forest Management, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia. Distinguished speakers and participants. Meskipun secara virtual, saya senang sekali dapat menyampaikan sedikit presentasi di acara yang sangat penting ini untuk mendiskusikan kontribusi sektor hutan dan tata guna lahan dalam target penurunan emisi gas rumah kaca Indonesia. Izinkan saya menyampaikan presentasi saya dalam bahasa Inggris. Please, let me start by saying that the World Bank applauds the government of Indonesia's actions to mitigate and adapt to climate change. We are particularly encouraged by the government's ambitious target to achieve carbon neutrality in the forest and land use sector by 2030. Healthy forests provide critical ecosystem services that support people and their economies. These include habitat for biodiversity, provision for drinking water and timber resources, erosion prevention, and flood control. Around 90 million people in Indonesia live in rural areas within 5 kilometers of a forest, so forests are critical for their livelihoods. Indonesia's forests and land use sector play a key role in climate mitigation and adaptation. Indonesia's forests, peatlands, and mangroves are some of the world's most important carbon sinks. Meanwhile, management of forests influences Indonesia's resilience to climate change impacts, for instance, by reducing forest fires and land subsidence on the coasts. As recognized by the government, achieving net sink in the FOLU sector will require several complementary actions implemented in an integrated manner. From the World Bank's perspective, a winning strategy will include advance in 4 areas. First, conservation, restoration, and fire management. Meeting the FOLU Net Sink 2030 goal will require keeping high-value forests standing while protecting peat and mangroves. This needs to be complemented by fire reduction and restoration of critical areas. These measures have a direct effect on greenhouse gas emissions while improving the livelihoods of local communities. Policies under implementation by the government of Indonesia, such as the peatland and forest conversion moratoria, have already contributed to reduce deforestation. Indonesia could expand this moratorium to include all types of mangroves, while tightening regulations on concessions within areas covered by the moratorium. In addition, Indonesia's large-scale efforts to restore degraded peatlands and, more recently, mangroves are world examples of ambitious initiatives. Increased financing for this type of large-scale restoration will be needed, a point I'll return to shortly. Second, increasing agriculture productivity. Improving in agriculture productivity plays a key role in achieving FOLU Net Sink. Intensified agriculture, growing more on existing cleared land, will help reduce pressure to expand agriculture into remaining forests. This is particularly important for smallholders, whose yields can be increased significantly. Indonesia can maintain and improve food security by investing in the yields of farmers, including through access to financial assistance, finance, to high-quality planting material, and to higher value markets. which is something I'm going to get to later when I talk about the role of the private sector. Third, spatial planning and land tenure resolution. Climate-informed spatial planning will help Indonesia achieve its FOLU net sink commitment by guiding infrastructure and agriculture development away from high-value forests. The governments could build on recent legal reforms introduced through the job creation law to speed up inclusive, climate-informed spatial planning. Transparency and security in land allocation and tenure decision is also important for building trust and decreasing conflict among stakeholders in the landscape. And fourth, fiscal instruments for sustainable land management can be used to complement regulatory approaches, as we have witnessed in several countries that have adopted such fiscal instruments. One example, intergovernmental fiscal transfers could be used to incentivize provinces and districts to improve their spatial plans and disclose concessions decisions, for instance. Taxes and subsidies could also be explored to encourage development away from high-value forests within and outside the forest state. Analysis underway by our team suggests that these could lead to emission reductions while raising revenues in rural areas. Now, how should these actions and the others already outlined by the government in their very well detailed FOLU net sink plans be financed? Multilateral financing is a key source, and the World Bank is proud to support Indonesia in their efforts. Globally, the World Bank is the largest multilateral funder of climate investments, having delivered over 26 billion in climate finance in the last fiscal year. There are several financing tools and approaches that could help tropical countries like Indonesia finance its efforts to reduce emission in the land use and forest sectors. Let me mention three of them. First, there is traditional concessional finance. This is long-term, below-rate loan financing that is provided by multilateral lenders to accelerate development objectives. It's increasingly being used for climate purposes. The World Bank now has a commitment of achieving a minimum of 35% of its concessional financing, achieving what we call climate co-benefits. So in other words, contributing to climate mitigation and adaptation. In Indonesia, we have advanced discussions to provide significant concessional financing, along with technical assistance and grant financing, to support the country's efforts to restore 600,000 hectares of degraded mangroves and to improve the livelihoods of coastal communities. In turn, these efforts are expected to lead to what we call blue carbon, so emission reductions in the coastal area. This could, in turn, generate additional financing to Indonesia through schemes that pay for emission reductions in the land use sector, which is my next point. So, another source of financing is results-based payments for emission reductions in the land use sector. Over the last 2 decades, the World Bank has made over $2 billion in emissions reductions payments in several sectors, including energy, waste management, and some in forestry. The World Bank manages at present 2 large-scale programs in Indonesia financed by multi-donor trust funds. One of them is the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, and the other is the Biocarbon Fund. In Indonesia, we are proud to support the East Kalimantan program, which aims to lower emission across 12 million hectares of land and deliver up to $100 million in payments. And we hope this can be delivered very soon. This program is now being replicated in the Jambi province, and we believe there is significant potential of replicating further in other subnational governments and in other countries. And third, and finally, in conclusion, private sector investments will be critical. Smallholder plantations, for instance, require finance to boost their yields, to replace equipment, put in traceability systems, among others. Private sector is increasingly sensitive to environmental and social concerns, a point that I'm sure other colleagues here will raise. So strengthening governance and encouraging certification and transparency systems in commodity supply chains will help reassure the market, and this is expected to lead to new financing rates and new investments in Indonesia's landscapes. In closing, I'd like once again to applaud Indonesia's commitment to achieving FOLU net sink by 2030 and mention that the World Bank stands ready to support. We believe that Indonesia is a showcase of where a multilateral agency is mobilizing different sources of financing to achieve a national ambition. And we hope that this model can be replicated in other countries as well. We thank you very much and wish you an excellent discussion. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you for your contribution. We duly noted your message that further development should be away from high value forests, which is in line with our colleague Peter Gondo on the importance of sustaining primary forests. And you also highlighted the commitment given by the bank to support Indonesia's forestry, which include its newly adopted FOLU net sink 2030. So thank you very much. To be fair with our colleague in the attending this virtually and the very early morning time, I would like to allow just one question to be read out first by my colleague here, Pak Chris. Can you read out from Pak Dede Nur Rahman? What is the question? And we ask Peter Gondo to respond.
Yes, thank you, moderator. The question from Pak Dede Nur Rahman is, Indonesia has ambitious target to reduce greenhouse gas emission approximately 60% through FOLU. How the UNDESA can give a contribution in order to help Indonesia to achieve the target?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. UNDESA has a number of ways that it can assist with. Firstly, if we start with the United Nations Forum on Forest Secretariat, we have a unit that we call the Global Forest Financing Facilitation Network, and I work for that unit. One of the things that we have been assisting countries with is developing national forest financing strategies. And I see a possibility of us collaborating in the implementation of the net sink plan, coming up with a financing strategy, but not just for the net sink plan, but for the overall forest management plan in Indonesia. That's one way. We also have other divisions that provide support, capacity building support, especially, I may mention one, which is our Financing for Sustainable Development division. They are actually promoting and supporting countries to implement integrated national financing strategies, where forest financing will be an integral part of the overall national Indonesian sustainable development financing. So those are some of the areas we can assist with, but there are many others we could explore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's quite a relief if you have such a concrete plan, and we will manage to materialize that. It will help a lot. I hope somebody will pick this up and following up, working together with UNFF in the near future. So I have two remaining speakers, which I have to apologize to them. I believe both of them are Indonesia, which include respected Professor Indroyono Susilo. So sorry, Pak, because keep you waiting. And Mr. Fong Sok of ASEAN. Can we have Mr. Wong Sok first? Do you have the tape or dari Jakarta or intervene directly? Mr. Wong Sok is Assistant Director, Head of Environment Division, a Sustainable Development Directorate under ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Department. Hi, Mr. Wong Sok, please. Masih mute.
Yeah, Thank you
Yes.
very much, Pak. I think it's a great opportunity for us and Secretary to take part in this important event. And from ASEAN Secretary, we would like to thank to Indonesia for this important hosting this event. And I believe this is really important for ASEAN Secretariat to take part in this sort of conversation about sustainable forest management, and this is really first time that that the way we join and also share from ASEAN Secretary perspective. And I think it's quite important that the way we can see this is important that we work together, no matter how, from forestry perspective and from other environmental perspective. And thank you very much. Taking this sort of opportunity, may I share the screen of the presentation of ASEAN Secretary. Thank you very much, Tri. I think it's about ASEAN cooperation on climate change, and among other, this is the way we highlight the key importance of the contribution of ASEAN toward the climate change sort of action. Next, please. With this presentation, I would like to highlight 4 points. One is about ASEAN's sort of overall sort of issue, and that issue present key challenges, and then ASEAN cooperation on environment and climate change, and key messages. So with that, I think I would like to go to ASEAN sort of matter. So as you may have noted, that ASEAN is one of the important organizations work together to towards sort of resolve all the key issues on environment, social, and economic matter. Among other, ASEAN sort of come together to agree on the key agenda for sustainable development that ASEAN established since 1967. As the way forward for sustainable inclusive social development. Next, please. So I think it's straightforward. ASEAN have from the Bangkok Declaration 1967, it's about to accelerate the economic growth, social and progress, cultural development in the region through joint endeavor. And second, to promote regional peace, stability through abiding respect for justice and rule of law. So this is really the fundamental of the key matter in ASEAN, that we bring the differences and also the commonality for ASEAN to work together to towards sustainable social development. Next, please. So ASEAN consists of 10 member states, and this is the way we are, and we accept the different and we work with different, and this the time that ASEAN member states join together to make a difference. Next, please. You see this slide, I think it's quite significant. ASEAN sort of working at different lengths and different sort of opportunity. Among other, I think the ASEAN social, climate change environment is fit into the ASEAN social cultural council. And I see, you can see a lot of circle here and there, but to keep it simple, it's environment is cross-cutting issue. One of the obvious issues about the ASEAN ministerial meeting on environment, AME, as you can see, with the technical advice from the ASEAN senior official on environment, you look at the right-hand side, really right-hand side here, it's about AMA, which is quite significant that contribute to the AACC pillar for sustainable development. I mean, with that, I think ASEAN sort of through the ASEAN social cultural pillar midterm review, ASEAN Ministry of Environment, Senior Officer of Environment, and the environmental sort of sector contributes significantly to the ASEAN social cultural sort of community. And ASEAN social cultural sort of community blueprint 2025. So this is very obvious that we are working together, even sort of not really specific, we are forestry, but it's overriding sort of strategy to contribute to forestry sort of matter from ASEAN perspective. Next, please. Nice. I think forestry and biodiversity is really challenging as a resource base. I just talked along the way, like, you know, there's really a matter to contribute to sustainable development as a resource pool, as well as for sustainable sort of development, including the, you know, terrestrial, marine, and also sort of, you know, key species from the ecosystem, from the species level, and also up to the, you know, site level. As you can see, it's significant. If you look at the just biodiversity perspective, look from country level, even Indonesia is a mega city of the biodiversity. I mean, just clear example, it's about species diversity. You know, it's about 5,600 plus species known to be threatened species in ASEAN, and many other as in IUCN Red List. So this to signify about what is important for ASEAN region, you know, from the terrestrial marine sort of environment. So that's the real factor for ASEAN is about diversity, richness, social, cultural, for the well-being of the people. Next, please. Of course, this is really a challenge because we really supply for the growth of the people and community. So the first place is about the agriculture. I mean, the invasion of the agriculture on the natural intact sort of habitat that creates sort of a lot of pressure on the environment and biodiversity. Second thing, I mean, 6 million sort of people, 600 million people of ASEAN. So that really impact on urbanization. Among other, it's about agriculture and forestry at IFA land use kind of thing. That's really impact in terms of supply chain in ASEAN. Next, please. Regardless, whatever happened, climate change still continues. I mean, the mean temperature it's increased, no matter from scientific community, but also from the empirical sort of observation, sea level rise. The change of precipitation here and there in the region is very obvious. And also the natural sort of disaster, including cyclone, flood, and also many other things that happen in the region. Then no doubt. I mean, it's from all of you from observation. I think it's really obvious. Next, please. Next, please. With that, ASEAN come together. So I just would like to share it's about two sort of window, the green and the yellow window. The green is about overall sort of environmental issue, and another window is about yellow, which is transboundary. It's a unique sort of thing that ASEAN come together to resolve this transboundary issue. Next, please. It was guided by the ASEAN sort of 2025 14 Ahead Together, which is the master document to guide ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, ASEAN Economic Community, ASEAN sort of culture, political, and also ASEAN sort of integration and for the ASEAN member state from the Mekong country. Next, please. This is about the ASEAN strategic plan on environment, which consists of a number of key priorities, including the management of natural resources, sustainable city, sustainable climate change, sustainable consumption and production, which is the key fundamental matter that involve people behaviors, and also the state level consumption and production matter that we can make significant difference from the climate change perspective, from chemical waste, and also environmental education and behavior change. Next, please. I mean, we say overarching sort of strategy, which is not really specific on the forestry, but I mean, this is the way we consider forestry. It sits in within, I mean, a number of 7 priorities. One is about nature conservation. That's the main priority, the first one that we put on top here. Because from environmental perspective, biodiversity is one of the key fundamentals that to drive the sustainable forest management, even under the priority of coastal marine environment and so on and so forth. Next, please. Here, I just provide you one of the simple on the climate change action, which is sort of, I mean, it's independent sort of thing. I look from the mitigation aspect and also the adaptation aspect. Contribute clearly on the climate change. Next, please. So climate change is cross-cutting issue. From the climate change adaptation, mitigation, also on, and also it's a cross-cutting issue in terms of city, environmental education, and also other sector, including forestry, energy, transport, and other. Next, please. This is about the initiative from the climate change perspective that contribute to the climate change. So you can see the number of things that about the starting from the instrument of the MOV toward the ASEAN joint statement that we come together to make a decision about ASEAN position. Next, please. This upcoming initiative for you to take note. I mean, among others, about the ASEAN Center for Climate Change, ASEAN Climate Change Partnership Conference, and also the ASEAN Statement on Climate Change toward the COP27, which is quite significant to highlight about ASEAN position, where we should head toward sort of climate change, forestry, and biodiversity aspect as well. So mitigation is still there. It's from the FOLU as agriculture, land use, and forestry is still quite important to ASEAN member states, as we are still a primary sort of productivity sort of focus. Next, please. So climate change is still a primary sort of objective for all ASEAN chairmanship. ASEAN have different chairmanship every year. It's starting from 2018 onward. I mean, ASEAN really prioritize on climate change. So ASEAN sort of 2018 is really chairmanship try to provide clear outcome document about ASEAN sort of, key message toward the Talanoy dialogue and beyond. Next, please. And 2019, and under ASEAN chairmanship of Thailand, Thailand also really take a lead on the ASEAN climate action in global fora So among other, under the UN Climate Action Summit. So in bracket, this one is all about matter of carbon sequestration and also a mitigation aspect that forestry still play a critical role in that sort of juncture. Next, please. You may have noted, ASEAN region is one of the most significant contribute to the peatland. So peatland is one of the major contributing factor to carbon sequestration. So that's why we are together try to manage peatland sustainably. In the meantime, try to reduce sort of greenhouse gas emission and the haze pollution in the region. So I think it's with that, I think ASEAN come together to agree on transboundary haze pollution agreement. And AATHPC is one of amazing sort of instrument to guide ASEAN to work together and to think different how we can cooperate and address the air pollution and haze issue. Next. Among other, ASEAN also come to ASEAN Center for Climate Change. So this, we believe, it really help to guide the dialogue and provide really sound-based solution for the region, and also provide sort of opportunity to engage with different sort of stakeholders, which is include unlimited sort of engagement, the UN, UK, and so on, that can help us to accelerate climate action in the region. Next, please. Climate change is not standalone, it's cross-cutting matter. That the way we work with different sort of partners from ASEAN perspective. And with that, I believe Indonesia also have a work across the border, I mean, in terms of the way engage from mitigation, adaptation as well. So that the way we address collectively key issue of climate change. Next, please. Next. So I think climate change among high priority, as you have seen, and also climate change is about the way we address collectively through capacity building with strategy and regional sort of integration and cooperation. And also climate change, it's about the way we need to work as a partner. Next, please. So this all the reference for you to consult and learn more about ASEAN cooperation and the way we contribute to climate change and forestry. Next, please. Thank you very much. I think it's a great opportunity for ASEAN to take part in the conversation. I believe this is quite important for you to take note and also to engage with ASEAN sector. ASEAN stand ready to support member states and work with the partner. Thank you, Ryan. The floor over to.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Fonsok. Please send our greetings to colleague in the ASEAN Secretariat, Jakarta. Thank you very much for your contribution. So I think we will go to the last, but not least, important speakers today. Professor Indroyono Susilo. He's the chairman of the Indonesian Forestry Business Association. But before proceeding, just to let you know, and we would like to record appreciation to many countries who have been involved in this webinar, which include Brazil, USA, Brunei, Palestine, Philippines, Thailand, Ecuador, India, Guyana, Mexico, Bhutan, Laos, and Malaysia. Thank you very much for your empathy and solidarity. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, it's an honor to invite Professor Indroyono Susilo. You may have your time back now. Sorry for keeping you too long.
Thank you, Mr. Moderators. Good afternoon, my distinguished guests in New York, and also good early morning in Indonesia. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, the private sector, to give some inputs regarding the NetSync FOLU 2030. Can I have my presentation, please? Is my presentation ready? Okay. So my presentation will relies on the vision from the private sector. Some of those issues may be the same topics. In the meantime, let me see it from our private sector point of view. Next, we realize that the president of Joko Widodo signed the Paris Agreement in 2015. Next, and we know that Indonesia, based on the updated determined contribution NDC of 2021, our target is 29% by self-effort, and by or 41% with international support. This is our target. Next. Based on the greenhouse gas emission level at 2010, our total of our emission is around 1.3 billion ton of CO2 emissions, and out of those, 647 million ton of those coming from the forestry sector. Why? Mostly due to peatland and forest fire, wildfire. So for that reason, we have to prevent as much as possible of having a wildfire in our forest and also in our peatland. Next. For that reason also, it was mentioned earlier by Dr. Rwanda, if our emission in 2010 is 1.3 billion tons and our emission business as usual is 2.9 billion tons in 2030, if we have to reach a target of 20%, we have to be able to get around 2.0 billion tons by 2030, or around 2 point something, I can see, by 2030. Next. So we have to put some action, what to do and how can we achieve this target. Based on our Indonesia long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilient 2015, our target is by 2030, our emission will be at 1.2 billion tons of CO2. And by 2050, will be only 540 million tons of CO2 emission. And we hope to be able to achieve the net zero emission by 2060 or earlier. While the net sink forest and other land use, we have to be able to achieve carbon absorption of minus 140 million tons by 2030, and hopefully we should be able to reach full absorption by minus 304 million tons of CO2 equivalents in 2050. This is the target we plan to achieve, both the NDC target and also the net sink FOLU target by 2030. Next. Is mentioned earlier also by Dr. Rwanda, you see that the NDC target by 2030, we still have emission of 216 million tons of CO2, but with the long-term strategy that we try to achieve, we should be able to have already a minus 140 net sink by 2030, and most of them contributions should come from the forestry sectors, 60% of those mentioned earlier. So how can we achieve this together? Next. This is the contribution of the private sector, maybe to be able to achieve this target. You know that we have already now 567 units of license holder of the concession holder in Indonesia, a total area of 30 million hectares of our forests. And now with the new law number 11, 2020 on job creations, we are now allowed to conduct forestry multi-business activities. By doing so, we should be able to do some climate mitigation action in order to reduce the emission target and in order to be able to achieve the net sink FOLU by 2030. The activities or mitigation action, there are 11 of those that we may conduct, goes from the reducing deforestation up into sustainable forest management, pit restoration, also water resource management. So 567 units of these license holders should work very hard to be able to achieve, because I think this is the largest feasible subsectors which will enable us for Indonesia to achieve the net sink FOLU by in 2030. Next. How big is the financial requirements to achieve this target? There was a number of has been assessed that we are talking about 14.4 billion US dollar to achieve the net sink FOLU by 2030. Out of those, is 45% will be more resource mobilized by the government, while the private sectors have the role to mobilize resources of 55%. It's a big percentage, you know, from the private financial resources, investment instrument, grant, green obligation, loans, private equity, and also corporate social responsibility, CSR. So out of those 14.4 billion US dollar financial requirement, I think around 8 billion US dollar or those should come from the private sector contributions. So I think the financial mobilization will be one of the topics. Thank you for the presentation from the UNFF, also for the World Bank, how to go with this area. I think we might also have to see and to explore Article 6, maybe for the Paris Agreement, and how the private sector can participate in the mobilizing financial resources, particularly for Indonesia, is because the private sector should contribute 50% of the total financial requirements. Next. So this is the private financing through carbon economic value. I think as mentioned already, there's already 11 mitigation action that can be conducted and ready to be done. And for that reason, we need financial institutions to support this one. And hopefully that this can be done through, among others, carbon market domestic, also carbon market international, in line with the NDC target. In last November 2021, the President already signed a decree, Presidential Decree number 98, 2021 on carbon pricing. I think the private sector now look forward for the regulations to implement the presidential decree, particularly on carbon pricing. We have to explore all the possibilities, and hopefully that since this decrees also relies on the ratification of the Paris Agreement in law number 16 and 2016. So hopefully the Article 6 can be explored in order that we can mobilize financial resources to be able to achieve the net sink FOLU 2030. The carbon market or domestic market already now being prepared. At the same time, also international market is also being discussed, especially P2B, but always in line with the NDC target. So NDC target should be hopefully can be achieved by G2 government-to-government agreement, while the B2B international market can be conducted by the private sectors. Next. So some of those example I like to share with you that how the business practices in the forest concession areas for the greenhouse gas emission reduction, because this is what happened, what should be done in the field. Next, for example, on intensive silviculture, best management practices in concession area, strip planting, cluster planting, for example, on Silin. Next, the other program is best management practices in forest concession areas on enrichment planting. This is also the way we should be able to achieve net sink FOLU 2030, but at the same time, all of these activities require financial support. So this is the thing that the private sector should work in order to achieve at least 55% of the total value of the net zero FOLU financial scenario. Next, also here we have on a reduced impact logging, he will say, we just found out that with the good real sea action, we should be able at least 26 to 50% reduction of the baseline emission. And I think this is quite good. By conducting reduced impact logging, we will reduce the waste of the wood log waste, and at the same time also we enable also to reduce the emissions of from the forestry sector. Next, this is very important on the peatland management and restoration, which is mentioned earlier by Dr. Rwanda, that we have to preserve and we have to restore our peatland, 3 million hectares of our peatland, because this one, if we have fire, if we have a dry peatland and will ignite land fire, this will emit very big CO2 emissions, and this will be very danger hazard for Indonesia conservation area. And I think Indonesia in the last 5 years is able to reduce the forest fire and land fires more than 82%. So hopefully that by preserving our peatland and by managing our peatland and also restoring our peatland, we should be able to make the peat remain wet. The fire will not occur in this kind of area. Next. And last but not least, I think the best management practices in agroforestry, in multi-basin activities, this also will increase the economic value of our land. At the same time, also will reduce the emission and providing a multi-business on agroforestry for the concession holders in Indonesia. So this is my last presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Susilo, for identifying the role and participation of private sectors in relation to our commitment in the Paris Agreement, in particular in its relevancy to the FOLU netting as a sector contribution for CO2 emission reduction. So thank you very much for your participation, your kind contribution. We are towards the end of our side event. Let us allow one more last question. And this question to be responded by Dr. Wanda Sugardiman. Can you read out the question, Pak Chris?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Domingos Cardoso.
There is a question from Domingos Cardoso. The question is, the target of reducing greenhouse gas emission to the level of 140 million tons of carbon dioxide by 2030 can be achieved if the permits for the exploitation of forest areas are stopped or a moratorium is given. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Domingos Cardoso. This is quite relevant what the regulation in Indonesia already taken place. So exactly what you mentioned there, the target can be achieved only the license on the natural forest and the peatland is can be moratorium. And even more about that, by the presidential instruction, we are not moratorium anymore, but we are stopping the new license on the natural forest and in the peatland. So with this activity in the place, it's already mentioned by Pak Indroyono, if we can maintain our peatland with no fire, we make sure that our target of FOLU net zero 2030 can be achieved more easily. That's a comment from this question. Thank you, Domingos. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Cardoso. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, we are towards the end, and I apologize that we cannot entertain all questions, but since it is available in writing, we are trying to many extent later to respond to it in writing as well. I hope we know your address, email address, so that we can give you the feedback. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's quite extensive that we discuss about FOLU NetSync 2030, and it's about implementation and all identified areas relevant to reduce and attain minus 140 million ton CO2 equivalent. Is that correct, Pak?
That's correct.
Yeah, so if we manage that by 2030, that is a very significant contribution to the reduction and make us much nearer to our target of commitment under the Paris Agreement, which is submitted in the NDC document to the UNFCCC. We discussed a lot about that, and then you heard clearly and loudly the perspective from our collaborators, which include bilateral, US, as well as multilateral, such as World Bank, ASEAN, UNFF, even private sectors. So seeing what is in the paper, we have no reason to fail. We should proceed and materialize this commitment. Thank you very much for your participation. I understand the time difference. And thank you very much for the Indonesia's mission to the United Nations in New York for facilitating and hosting this meeting. Thank you very much for the lovely speakers. And thank you very much to all of you. With this, is there any other intervention you expect? If no, then we adjourn. Thank you very much. Thank you. Capek juga ya. I thank you very much.